Welcome everybody to another episode of Chocolate Travels. Today I'm going to talk to Albertus Eskes, who is a researcher in cacao, who's been researching cacao and involved in chocolate for many decades. He has some very interesting views on where the flavor of cacao comes from, related to the fruit, and we're going to have a discussion together about his work and his ideas revolving around cacao and chocolate. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Joseph with Bean to Bar World, and I'm here with Albertus Eskes. He's in Rio, Brazil. Is that correct? Is that where you are?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So we're going to discuss many aspects of his work and topics related to cacao and research and things like that. So let's get started. So the first question I have is, what drew you into studying cacao? How did you get into it, and what did you really like about it early on?
Thank you. I all started in 1971 when I came to Brazil as a student studying in Wageningen University. You have to do a practical stage, and I did that at CEPLAC, which was then a very good institution. My father-in-law did not know that I would steal his daughter. That cacao was the first love.
Okay.
6 months, cacao. When I met my wife, I had no words for saying love in Portuguese. I only used, she was for me a flower of cocoa. So the cocoa is a very overwhelming plant.
Mm.
It is different from others. And in my stage as a student, I studied the relationship between the growth of the fruits and the growth of the leaves.
Okay.
And I found out that the leaves win the struggle. So if you have a leaf that is growing, then there's one less fruit that can grow. It's called sterile wilt. And so cacao means that cacao in the wild, it prefers to grow than to make pots.
Right.
And I think it's a very clear choice. I had worked with coffee later on. Coffee does the contrary. The coffee beans, when there is no food or no water, then the leaves will drop.
Oh, okay.
And you get a naked tree. So coffee prefers to feed the children, to maintain the species. Completely opposite strategies.
Right.
And then I passed many years. My big and come back to cocoa was in 2007. I traveled for a genetic project all over the world. And I always liked to eat the pulp. And I discovered that the countries where the pulp is nice, the cocoa is also nice. You have fine cocoa. The extreme example was Trinidad. Trinidad with its TSH varieties. And when I went there to work with them, we always got 2 or 3 fruits with the pulp to be eating while we were chatting. So, and
is that the fruit? Is that the fruit that tastes like banana? Is that the one that mentioned the banana flavor?
I will get there.
Okay.
Then, so when the pulp is nice, the price of your cocoa is nice. Trinidad was the country with the highest cocoa price, 3 times the world market price. And for me, it was the place where the pulp was the nicest. And as you say, the example, because of this, I got a hypothesis that the the flavors and the aromas in the pulp go to the bean, and then you will find them in the chocolate if the fermentation is well done.
Mm.
And that's a very big if. And uh, one good example was in Trinidad. I was teaching my peers to find out the variation in pulp taste and in pulp aroma. And I was in a field of Trinitario that mainly varies only for acidity and sweetness. There was not many other fruits. And then suddenly I found one tree with the pulp that was completely like a banana. Incredible. That was for me the big eye opener that we harvested the 10 fruits and they got chocolate made of it by Ed Seguin in the United States. And the chocolates had a very strong, uh, not direct fresh pulp. It became more like a mature
Mm.
pulp of the banana. And so a banana jam, I would call it. But the strength of this taste was very, very dominant. Was very. So from there on, Joseph, went on my story, the value that I gave to the pulp in relation to what I should give to, or what is given generally to the chocolate taste.
Right.
I don't know if you want to hear that now.
So when you were tasting the banana flavor in the pulp in Trinidad, was there in that, do you remember at that time, were there banana trees growing with the cacao there or no?
No, only cacao trees.
Because I remember
Only.
years ago when I was a chocolatier, somebody from Cacao Berry, a sales rep, was coming and saying, "Oh, we have this cacao." I'm pretty sure it was from Trinidad too, and they said it has very strong banana notes because it grows with the banana trees. And this was a long time ago when I was new into fine chocolate. I listened to what everyone around me said, and they always talk about terroir, terroir. The reason why the flavor is this is the soil, the other trees around there. And I just believed it, I accepted it. But then when I was looking for the research to back it up, years later, I didn't find anything. And then that's when I came across your research. And I thought that was so interesting that you put a lot of focus on the genetics, and the genetics themselves impact the flavor of the fruit, and then the fruit flavor impacts the seeds. So it's very it's very interesting for a lot of people, because a lot of people, especially in the fine chocolate world, still haven't heard this information. So why do you think this information that you're finding, that you've been researching for years, how come it's not reaching a lot of people? What do you think?
I published an important paper in 2007, another one in 2012, in the conference in Cameroon. And that paper, the influence of the flavor environment in the pulp affecting the cocoa chocolate flavor. And this paper was read by 3,000 people. By academia, they tell me that it is 3,000 people. No one of those that read my paper contacted me and asked me any question.
Hmm.
So the normal number of reading my papers is about 50. So 50 against 3,000.
Right.
So I had it published. One could have read it and tried to. I think the problem is just that is a difficult area to work with, because the environment is so variable. And but there are two types of influence of the environment that I participated in Brazil. Is the shades cocoa under shade is more acid than cocoa in the full sun. And the chocolate is more acid. And what was told to me, and I believe in Mexico, the Indians have selected trees which instead, besides the cocoa, influences the flavor of the cocoa. And I believe there can be a reason by the roots. The roots, we know, communicate between trees. And I know that big part of the flavor of the tree comes from the roots. So it is not impossible that one root infects another root. But they plant a row of those trees and then another row of cocoa. And if they have long-term experience, I can believe it. But cocoa is genetically such a wide species. If you compare amelonado cocoa, which is not very variable, it's very narrow. You compare that with Arabica coffee, you have more or less the same variation, genetic variation. Arabica coffee, the main effect is terroir. The main effect is the altitude and the shades, not the genetics. The genetics do not have much influence. But cocoa is so variable genetically. I would say, more than 30 times than coffee Arabica. And looking more in detail to the flavors and the aromas from the cocoa pulp, I learned that only two flavors in cocoa are not from the pulp. That is the chocolate flavor and the nutty flavor. Both are related to the reserve protein that is in the cocoa. The other acidity, citric acidity, not the vinegar, citric acidity, the caramel is related to sweet pulp, and then you have the fruity,
and the floral,
fresh fruit, brown fruit, and many types of floral.
So I just want to stop you for a second, because you mentioned that I think a really important point is the genetic variability of cacao, which I think a lot of people don't understand, because they think, like you said, coffee or wine grapes and the clones of wine grapes in the fields. The genetics of those is much less diverse. You don't have a lot of wiggle room for different mutations or flexibility. If you take one population, take it somewhere else, the divergence in the qualities is not the same as cacao. Cacao is very complex, I think, and a lot of people don't understand that.
But those that talk about the terroir in cacao, they do not realize that each terroir has nearly another variety of cocoa.
Right, exactly.
So why explaining terroir by the neighboring trees? Well, there is a good reason for genetic variation, like, for example, Madagascar, PNG is all Trinitario. In Trinidad, there's still a lot of Trinitario. In Central America, a lot of Trinitario. Peru is the Nacional, which is not growing elsewhere. So I can explain the effect of terroir by the genetic effects.
Right, because even within the umbrella of, let's say, National Cacao or similar varieties, wild varieties, if they're taken into different populations, because of that wide genetic variance, the same variety in a way taken into different populations over time can develop into different tastes, right? Different qualities, different flavored fruits, and different flavors overall. That's sort of how I understand it. So it's very interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
The Spaniards distributed the Criollo. Everywhere, Criollo was a problem because it's genetically not very fit. Then they distributed Trinitario. Those countries that receive Trinitario have acid cocoa, acid pulp, and acid chocolate. So there is good reason, a good genetic reason why there is a terroir effect.
And so my next question is that, so I think we talked about the fruit. So one thing I want to touch on too is your anima fermentation. So for those people who don't understand, what's so unique about anima fermentation and how does it transform bulk cacao into fine cacao?
I can tell you that I don't understand either.
So what do we do?
Anima needs a lot of studies. I have now 3 students from Cameroon, from Colombia, and from Cote d'Ivoire starting to work on anima study. In my world, I could only do empirical work, repeat, and then try something else. Mm-hmm. Anima is completely different from normal fermentation because it is fully aerobic. And the law of fermentation in any fruit or in any plant says that you should start without the air.
Without oxygen, yeah.
Anima is, I don't know if you realize the difference between respiration and fermentation. Mm-hmm. Fermentation is what normally happens in a box that is closed, there's no air, and then the sugar is transformed into alcohol. The respiration in the same box, if there's air, the sugar will be transformed in water and CO2. What happens if you have 50% more air in a box? Then the outcome is that you have less acetic acid because there's less substrate for the acetic acid bacteria. And that means that the fermentation is shorter. That means that the fermentation can vary between 3, 4, or 5 days. And
that's still enough. So that's still enough time to decrease the bitterness too.
The anima fermentations, we have used our mouth and our nose to finish fermentations. And that is completely different from the normal fermentation where they look at the color of the beans. We smell the acetic acid because there's less acetic acid than in a normal fermentation. The acetic acid goes down. When the acetic acid goes down, the bitterness disappears. It can go vary between 0 and 1 and 2 maximum. And so the time is enough. 4 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. We have done a whole batch of beginning anima studies. Everything was ready in 2 days and no bitterness.
Wow.
But if you do it with larger batches, there will be about 3, 4, 5 days.
So is this a little bit similar to how some farmers will precondition the pulp? Maybe they squeeze the juice, maybe they keep it in the pod storage. Does that have a similar effect, or is this something very different, the anima?
Anima is based on preconditioning. I did it myself. Later, I discovered that now in Ghana, it is recommended to let the pot 7 days rest. Mm-hmm. We have started with 0. We did 1, we did 2, we did 3, we ended up with 7, 5 or 7. 5 when the weather is dry, 7 when the weather is wet, because there's more pulp in the 7 days in the wet cocoa. So it needs more time to dry up because that's what happens in the pots that And that's a very important first step of Anima.
Okay. And also, I want to talk about your TropMix, right? Which is very interesting as well. Something that I told a chocolate maker in Vancouver about it because they were in the Philippines. And I said, here, look at this paper, because then in the Philippines, they have soursop too, just like you tried in your experiment. And so they tried it. They added, you'll tell me more about it, but they added the soursop to the fermentation and they created a chocolate bar from it. It didn't taste exactly like soursop, but it was different than the cacao that didn't have the soursop. It's very interesting flavor. So tell us more about how you came up
What
with
about,
TropMix, how it
what about
works.
the bitterness? Because we did probably more than 100 TropMix fermentations. One fruit, the jackfruit, this was in the time that we didn't have Anima. We were using normal fermentation. Jackfruit dominate cocoa. You can use jackfruit and the sweetness of jackfruit, and it eliminates the bitterness, and it's ready in 6 days. Whereas most of the other fruits, Joseph, the the outcome was that instead of 6 days, we needed 8, 9 days to become ready. The patent it was done with a first batch that took 12 days to
Wow.
become, and the cocoa was not spoiled. That
Okay.
wasn't
That's interesting
but
because a lot of times they talk about over fermentation, creating the hammy flavors and things like that. So even at 12 days, it wasn't over fermented. That's interesting.
if you put fruit with cocoa, you have a new type of fermentation. Each is different from the other.
Mm.
But the most of them, Joseph, they reacted too long to my idea, and they were too bitter.
Mm.
In the paper that you read, there was 1 or 2 points more bitterness in the cocoa. The taste of the fruit was fantastic, but too bitter. So I stopped. I had a patent. I paid for it for 5 years, and I thought I should stop it because I should better work with new fermentations, and that's why I started Anima. I
Right.
wanted to do I wanted to do TropMix with a fermentation that goes quicker
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that doesn't have acidity and bitterness. And TropMix now, all all fruit that I tested with Anima work out very well. No
Yeah, I
problem.
think you mentioned
No
you added spices too, right? As well. You tried cinnamon or
what
something. I think
I
did you
did
add
cinnamon and a clove.
right, right, right.
You know,
And that worked too. Interesting.
yeah.
So
No,
so you talk about this anima and even TropMix as a way to even in West Africa to improve the flavor of the bulk cacao. They already have the trees. Maybe this is a way to improve the flavor. Is that correct? Is that what you're suggesting?
shall we talk about the African experience that was initiated end of 21? The GIZ, the German aid organization, and the French CIRAT organization invited me to have an experiment in 2 sites in Cote d'Ivoire with Anima, and we included two TropMix as well. But I did different versions of Anima to see if it works the same way. The outcome, I always read the quality by the beans. I don't need to wait for the chocolate. The outcome
Mm.
was very good. Was even in one side the floral, which in Brazil it's difficult to get more than 2 or 3 points on the floral scale.
Mm.
And in Cote d'Ivoire, in the Yamoussoukro site, not in the other, so it must be genetic. the, the, the floral in some of the treatments was 10.
Wow.
It was incredible. The other treatments was 5, 6, 7. And So Anima has the advantage that the flavors and the aromas of the pulp are preserved and are put, if you ferment correctly, they are all there. When I do my evaluation of cocoa beans, Anima beans, or chocolate beans, there's citric acidity, there is no bitterness, no astringency, and there is a lot of caramel, a lot of nuts, 4, 5, 6 on the scale. That you don't see that in normal cocoa. And then the fruity, the fresh fruit in the pulp often becomes mature fruit.
Mm.
And there is something to do with the temperature of roasting.
Mm.
If you roast a little bit too much, then it will become. But the mature fruit is also nice. And then floral.
So when you were talking about the cacao with the Anima treatment in Ivory Coast, so were you talking specifically about cacao trees in Ivory Coast that had nice flavor? The fruit had nice flavor? So different than the other one?
I was in Brazil in the pandemic. I could not travel.
Okay.
So I listened to what they told me. I asked them to do 2 sites, and one side had more floral than the other side. But the quality of both sides was very good.
So the reason why I ask you is because usually, the regions that pump out the commercial cacao, the bulk cacao, the cacao itself usually is very, basic cocoa flavor, nothing too much interesting. And the fruit itself, maybe like CCN 51, the fruit sometimes is usually more sour and bland, nothing too interesting. So is that your understanding as well, that the fruit of the cacao in Ivory Coast generally doesn't taste very good? Or are you saying that there is some there that does taste good?
Anima got 2 prizes in Peru for the International Chocolate Awards of Martin Christie. We got 2 prizes. One was the Trinitario, which they consider as bulk, and the other one was CCN 51. So Anima modifies common cocoa, bulk cocoa, into fine cocoa. Because the minimum that you get out of Anima.
Sorry, was that Anima by itself or Anima and TropMix you're talking about?
That one was Anima and TropMix.
Okay.
Even if you don't, like in Brazil, you have the amelonado. The amelonado, if you make Anima, you have a full palette of tastes. What I miss mostly in Brazilian fine cocoa, bean to bar cocoa, is that it has a strong chocolate flavor, but nothing else.
Mm.
And my understanding is that they get bitter beans after 6 days, and then they let it rest for a year for the bitterness to go down. But still, the bitterness will be too high for good chocolate.
Mm.
So they roast at a high temperature, 130, 135, 140. Right. And then the bitterness goes away, but all the rest is going away.
Right. Interesting.
And it is the Brazilian taste. The Brazilian wants to taste chocolate. They're not very interested in Anima because Anima is less chocolate.
Yeah.
It's less because the mechanism of the protein, the breakdown hydrolysis of the protein is not complete with Anima because it's quick. So you have part chocolate flavor and part nutty flavor. That is what the peptides do with the sugar. So Anima is not that strong in
cocoa.
Interestingly, CCN 51 with Anima is strong in chocolate flavor. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it varies normally between 4 and 6. CCN 51 is 7 on a 10-point scale.
Yeah, it's an interesting because when I'm teaching people about fine chocolate, it's hard for some people to wrap their minds around the idea that you can have a chocolate bar that doesn't really taste like chocolate, right? And some people don't like that. They want that cocoa chocolate flavor. But I think what's so interesting, which is starting now, is that you have a lot of chocolate now. It's like cheese, where you have cheese made with the same ingredient, milk, but they texture is different, taste is so different, completely different, and people are used to that. So it's interesting that you say it's hard to sell that idea to the Brazilian market because they have an expectation. So the hard part is getting people to change their expectations, to be a bit more open to trying chocolate tasting in different ways. That's definitely a big important point that a lot of
I,
us face.
I found it more easy to get interest from the general public than from the cocoa industries.
You're right.
They, this does not have much cocoa. Not interesting to. That's what Barry Callebaut says.
Right. Yeah. Because they have a
So
specific idea in mind, right? This is what I want our product to taste like. It works with all our cookies and our caramels and all that sort of stuff. So they don't want to change the gears. That's going to be a lot of work for them. So I think it's interesting because now you have chocolate makers in South America and Philippines, wherever, Southeast Asia, they're, growing their own cacao. They say, hey, we have cacao trees in the back. So maybe they're going to start trying your methods, the Anima, the TropMix, and maybe they will be the ones to really push that out there. Hopefully. I think that would be very interesting.
yeah, let me go back to 2007. I was I was farmer. I was for 10 years. I was a cocoa farmer, and I grow the Amelonado variety, which is a bulk variety. So my idea of TropMix was born to improve the Amelonado variety. That's what you saw in the publication. That was
Right.
Amelonado.
Yeah.
And but one other thing, in 2008, I initiated the Cocoa of Excellence. I don't know if you know that.
I've heard of it. I didn't know you were associated with it.
The idea was mine.
Oh, okay.
All the regulations of how to work it out was mine. And I put in there two types of cocoa. One is commercial and one is experimental. And I wanted that for my own farm to do TropMix, to be able to get prices for TropMix. And 2 years later, after I left the Cocoa of Excellence, they forbidden the use of anything, even inoculation, any inoculation or any fruit or addition is forbidden. They cannot participate. They took out the experimental group. And I get very, very pissed because the chocolate makers, they have 80%, I was told, of the fine chocolate is made by infusions and adding salt, adding fruity things, 80%. And the farmer is not allowed to create
That's a good point.
variability
Yeah.
and win a prize with that. It's impossible.
That's a very good point. That at the other end, they market themselves by having flavored lines, flavored chocolate, milk chocolate, chocolate with tea and coffee and all this stuff. But now you weren't allowed to do that at the other end, which, yeah, that's a very interesting point. Um, but I hope that your work gets out there more so that people experiment with it. But do you think that, let's say, for instance, the Anima method, the TropMix method, if the bigger industry started to use that, do you think that might have a negative effect on the little pockets of the fine cacao that are already there? Because maybe some farmers will say, well, I don't need to grow the really nice cacao. It's too hard to grow. It's more expensive. Maybe I'll grow the bulk cacao and use this method. Do you see anything like that maybe happening?
I don't see anything wrong. What I think is that the fine cocoa altogether in the world is maybe 5% of the total. We have 95% to do TropMix. So
Right. That's a good point. Another thing that you mentioned is Dutching. So you try so originally you're from Holland, correct? You're from the Netherlands?
yes.
Yes. So they invented cocoa powder, they invented Dutching, but you like to push people away from Dutching. Why is that to people who don't know?
What I've learned from literature about Dutching is that Dutching is eliminating the bad things in cocoa and eliminating the good things as well. So typically with the Dutching you get chocolate. It is strong in cocoa, but has no other fine flavor traits. So I find this a poor process, and the most important thing that goes away is the antioxidants.
Right.
I don't know if you know what I've read is 80% of the antioxidants disappear. So all the good things that cacao can do with diseases, of preventing diseases or curing diseases, I saw a paper with 14 different illnesses that cocoa can attack. And the chocolate that are made 95% in the world with Dutching does not do anything. And I think the public does not know it. The public thinks, oh, if we eat any chocolate, we are okay. We can have a good effect. And just the bean to bar is doing a good job in this sense that there's no. And Anima could have a good effect because we can produce Anima in large scale.
Yep.
And not using anymore the Dutching. Do you know how expensive it is to do the Dutching?
I don't know.
That's a great secret because nobody told me. I always ask the industry people, and I talked to an ex-director of Cargill, and he told me that varies between 12 and 35%.
Wow.
Because they use different grades, different intensity. But if you calculate that for the whole cost of what chocolate costs to the industries, it means that the industry can give the farmers 2 or 3 times more than they get now,
right?
And they still make a lot of money. You understand?
Yeah.
Serious.
You take out the Dutching and you use that money that you would have paid there to pay the farmers a more decent wage. That's a very good point. Yeah. But again, I guess their end goal is to have a very basic product.
But these industries are very difficult. I'm not going to tell you the name
of course.
Because we had an order for 12 tons of Anima cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire, and I negotiated. They never said how much they were prepared to pay, and in the end, I came to 30% bonus. And you know that in Cote d'Ivoire, the price is 60% of the world market price for the farmer. So they would get 60 plus 30%, that would be 78% of the world market price.
Mm-hmm.
They said, no, we're not prepared to pay for that.
Yep. Another thing I want to talk about, we talked about genetics. And you talk about it in your book here as well, Phenomenal Cocoa, and some of your research papers. And I just want to talk a little bit more about, if you were talking to the public, I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand genetics. Even a lot of people that come to my tastings, they assume, oh yeah, the soil, the terroir, and they kind of disregard genetics. And so how important is genetics to the flavor? Because you talked a lot about the anima, right? The process, the fermentation, which can change, transform it. So is the genetics still very important to find cacao compared to
I,
terroir?
I go back to the banana tree, cocoa tree in Trinidad. All the trees around were Trinitarian trees, and they have no banana flavor at all. So if there's one in the middle of nothing, that means it is genetic.
Mm.
When I went to Peru, we discovered 43 flavors and aromas. And in average, we got some 4, 5, 6 trees that we found in the valley where the chuncho grows. The chuncho, it should be a small variety like a melonado, but it has 43 different flavors and aromas, which I all have to consider as a genetic, because if you got mandarin flavor that come from the south of the valley, 200 kilometers, and it has the same expression, it has the same force as a mandarin flavor near to where we were in the center of the
Mm.
if you have expressions, another reason is that the mandarin flavor 2,200 kilometers south has the same level of expression, has the same taste. If it would have been affected by the environment, it would be variable. But nearly always we found if we found a mango, it's always the same mango. If we found a rose, it's always the same rose. And
That's a
so
good point.
that does not only mean that it is genetic, it means that there are very few genes involved. Can you imagine a rose? A rose, normally one would expect 400 different volatiles to give this aroma. Cocoa does the same. It's impossible that cocoa manipulates 400 different genes. There must be only 10 or 15 genes, and cocoa is capable of imitating exactly the aroma of the rose using other genes.
I think that's what's so
That's,
fascinating about cacao is how it can replicate a lot of these aroma compounds from so many different foods. A lot of people who come to my tastings, they can't comprehend that. They're like, why does it taste like this fruit or this floral? They don't understand. Did you put it in here? Did somebody add it? So it's interesting, and I think it's important to push the knowledge about the genetics of cacao if we want to keep sustaining and growing all these beautiful flavors, right? Because if we neglect it, how important it is, then you're going to just neglect these trees and the importance, and there's going to be less of it. Farmers are less likely to grow it. People are not going to use it, market it. So I think it's very important to put a lot more emphasis on the genetics, especially because I think, there seems to be more research that supports genetics as opposed to, let's say, the soil. Like, I still can't find anything that supports the soil directly linking to the qualities of the flavor in the cacao tree, unless you have. I haven't found it yet.
a famous French chocolate maker,
Okay.
Bodat, he made a video in Ecuador in a field of CCN 51 saying, look at the trees that have flowers and have smell. Look at the spices that grow on the soil. All this goes into the CCN 51. This was 2 years ago.
Oh, really? Wow.
It's at high level, this misconception of
Yeah, I think because it's based on marketing, right? It's always been a marketing tactic, and it sounds very cachet, very interesting, but someone like me who's very curious and you want to look for the evidence to back it up, research something, anything, and you can't find it, then it starts to, question, is it really true, and what is the cause behind the flavors? So yeah, I think the genetics definitely super important in understanding fine cacao. And like you said, it gets complicated because it's not like coffee or wine. It's so complex. So if you're not a geneticist like me, it's very difficult to grasp a lot of that, I think, especially for consumers.
Cocoa is an amazing genetic plant. It is unexpected because any fruit tree or flower tree that you work with genetically, you cross one with another, and you have a whole range of different intensities and tastes coming out. And therefore, it's so difficult. Even the tomato, which they have tried with genetic engineering, they did not succeed to find a gene that that controls the taste and the color of the tomato.
Mm.
And cocoa, each package, the mango goes with the rose, the mandarin goes with the jasmine. All these combinations are packages.
Mm.
Cocoa is able to combine a flavor and aroma with the flavor, and if you take seed of it, what my friend did in Peru, 2 trees with banana flavor, he planted 10 trees of each. All of them had banana flavor.
Mm. That's
more
amazing.
more genetic than that is impossible.
Exactly. And it's pretty simple to experiment with, right? Like people talk about terroir and the soil, but nobody's taking a tree and putting it in the soil and see if it tastes the same, right? But you just said that some people replicate that. They replicate the genetics, different areas, and the flavor is the same, which just confirms that genetics is very, very important. And so we talked a lot about different aspects of your research, the fruit, the anima, the TropMix, all that sort of stuff. Is there any other past or current research that you want to discuss now that you think is, different than what we've been discussing?
I have made some notes. Oh, what cocoa studies never end, and so I'm in a phase. I'm getting older. I want more scientific data of what I did empirically.
Mm.
And my paper on the flavor and the aroma that I prepared to be published by Science in 2016. I had a very beautiful paper. I think you saw the paper, and Science said this is not enough. You need 2 or 3 groups of people working on the same topic.
Mm-hmm.
Nature was the same, and then I went to 3 scientific magazines, and they said this is not science, this is empirical.
Mm.
And I tell them that all new sciences start with empirical observations. So they did not follow up. So I found a Brazilian publisher, and you may have it, Agrotropica paper, where I was able to, and the same comes back in the book. I've written a lot of the flavor and aroma from the fresh fruit comes from the book. So now my attention goes, and I hope we can do it more. There was three students in the world that got to know me and got my book and want to do some studies related to one in Colombia is interested in comparing the substances, the volatiles of the cocoa, jasmine, and of the real jasmine.
Oh, okay.
Compare the rose, the same with
Mm-hmm.
the rose,
Yeah.
etc. The one in Cameroon is comparing all the best fermentation technologies that I know of in variants that I have created. Because after Anima, is coming Tranima. Tranima is a hybrid of Anima and traditional.
Okay.
Because Anima is good if you work on it in the same place, or that Anima is a little bit susceptible to transport. So if
Okay.
you transport under bad conditions, it may suffer an increase in bitterness.
Mm.
So my recommendation now is use Anima in your own place or near from where you work. And Tradima does not have this problem.
Okay.
And it gives the same quality as Anima.
Mm-hmm.
So that's we're now working on it more than 1 year. And a very important aspect of Tradima that we discovered that if you ferment the beans, then if you let the beans after fermentation, let's say that the bitterness is 4. If you dry it in the shade with ventilation, the bitterness goes down to 0.
Hmm.
So the fermentation process is not ended when you take the beans out of the box.
Right.
And we do that for Anima, and we do that for Tranima. And it should be a very easy way. I would like to get more publicity for those simple things that can help a lot
Mm-hmm.
in reducing bitterness and improving quality.
Yeah.
So we continue to work on that, to do some different treatments. In Cote d'Ivoire is a student that wants to study different varieties. So the chocolate flavors and aromas from different varieties. And I recommend to use 3 different fermentation methods and see if there's an interaction between genotype and the way you treat, the way you ferment.
Right.
So that are among the priorities for getting Anima. If you wish, one can put more than 10 PhD students to study the important things. Why does it happen? Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult. I was talking to another researcher he's entomologist. He was researching midges for Sipomaya, and he finds it very difficult again to get the funding to do the research. And also, like you, he has ideas of how to improve yield, and the bigger industries don't really pay attention, so it's sad when you have such great work and ideas and they're just sitting there, nobody's using them. So I hope that through this video more people out there, even just small farmers around the world, they hear this, they're like, oh, maybe try this, and maybe they can replicate it, and it'll grow through that way. I don't think it would necessarily grow through the big industries, right? There's too much resistance there. So I think
there's one more activity that may take off. I I I sold the Anima methods for the owner of a restaurant and an owner of a hotel. He is a politician in Cote d'Ivoire.
okay.
And the first chocolate maker in Cote d'Ivoire, with the beans from Cote d'Ivoire, she told me, Bertus, I hate chocolate, but Anima is very good.
Oh wow.
For an African lady to say that, there must be a difference.
Yeah, definitely.
And now the man set up an enterprise, the only enterprise in the world, where they use only Anima beans. But what I told you, nearby, 200 kilometers, and there's no problem. The bitterness is the Anima beans. That works very well. So, and he said, Bertus, I told the story to the politicians in Cote d'Ivoire. They want you to teach all the farmers in Côte d'Ivoire to do Anima. Well, that's
is that going to
maybe
happen?
that may be a big wish.
Yeah.
But
Very nice. Excellent. So thank you very much, Albertus, for taking the time and talking a lot about your research. I do have some research summaries on my website, and I also have a link to your book that people can download and read as well. So all the information that you're talking about and more of the details are in this book as well. And
did you like the chameleon?
the chameleon, yes. Yeah. It is very.
Get it? Why is there a chameleon?
I think so, because you talk about the chameleon has many different layers of color and all those sorts of things, right? Similar to the cacao, it's like we were talking about, the genetics is so variable.
The chameleon imitates the rainbow, which is hundreds of kilometers above. Cacao imitates perfectly Mandarin. That's a very crazy thing with cocoa. If it imitates something, it is 100%. The people ask me, how did you identify it? I say, it's difficult not to identify because cocoa imitates 100%.
Interesting.
This is incredible. So,
okay. So that's what you're saying, is that cacao is like a chameleon. It can replicate the jasmine, the mandarin, banana.
If you allow me to say a few words on the little chapter which is in the book, that cocoa may be supernatural.
Sure.
Did you read that?
I read it. I don't know if I remember exactly what you were talking about, but I did read it a while ago because you sent it to me.
For example, all the three citrus imitating flavors, that is lemon, mandarin, and tangelo, they all go together with jasmine. How does cocoa know that in the wild, the citrus flower has a jasmine taste? Why I calculated the chance that this happens 3 times, because there are 13 different aromas. So that could have been distributed. No, everything is jasmine. The chance is 1 in 1,000. If you do that proportional, the statistic chance, that would be 1 in 500. So there's a big chance that something happened, that cocoa got some help to invent those. And the most incredible thing of all is cocoa does not have its own signature. It does not have its own flavor. It does not have its own aroma.
That's what's so interesting, because most of the world would say to you, you're wrong. They would say cocoa does have a distinct flavor, right? The one we're used to in the supermarkets. But you're saying no, it doesn't. And I think that's what's so interesting is, you know, when you deal with what you're talking about and fine cacao, fine chocolate doesn't have a distinct flavor. And that's what's so, for me, so fascinating, so exciting about chocolate. So I like that point. Definitely. Excellent. Okay. And if people want to contact you for whatever reason to understand your research or to work with you, what's the best way for them? Okay.
Can you read this?
Albertus Eskes at gmail.com. Okay. I'll put something in the video that puts it there as well.
Yeah, because anybody that interested may ask for the book. They can ask questions. They may try to do new things. So thank you for making propaganda for the book.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to talk to you.
I would wish one day we can walk together in the cocoa fields. And you can feel, you can taste the difference.
I would love that. That would be amazing. Yeah, I hope so. Well, I hope to talk to you again soon. It'll be nice.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. All the best.